Welcome to Module 3 of how to play aggressively pre-flop and dominate aggressive players. Now this is dealing with being 3-bet. So we've open raised and catastrophe, someone's re-raised us. And this is a spot where I think that you can probably make a huge impact and transformation on your pre-flop play just by giving it some attention. Because I think that too often you can just fold without thinking. Or very often you see players call the 3-bet and see a flop in quotes without thinking. So we're going to spend some time on this and really get into what you should do when someone else 3-bets you. So the first point to make is that being re-raised pre-flop mostly sucks. It's mostly crappy. Until you get up against very aggressive players, and we've just given you some stuff to do against those people, but even against very aggressive players, more times than not, a 3-bet represents a strong hand. So, well done, sir. Or madam. So giving up in this situation is fine, because most of the time we don't have the best hand, and folding and accepting that is good, because, you know, in a complete vacuum, that's correct, isn't it? You don't have the worst hand as your opponent, then you don't want to put any more money in the pot. And of course it's cost effective. If we've made an open raise, we might have bet 2.5 big blinds, for example, and someone 3-bets us and we just throw our hand away, then that's all the hand has cost us. If we call and see a flop with the worst hand, for example, we can go on to lose our entire stack. So the path of no resistance is actually the right one here. If you choose not to give up, and you choose to continue in the pot, then there's a golden rule, and it's one of my golden rules for poker, and I know I say this over and over and over, but I can't impress this upon you enough, the importance of it. You must have a plan to continue in the hand, okay? More money's been put in the pot by your opponent. They've taken the lead in the initiative. If you want to continue past this point, you must have a plan. And the kind of second rule for the plan is it should be aggressive most of the time in this situation. So I want you to have a defensive mindset at first and then an aggressive plan to follow it up, if you see what I mean. So a lot of the time we're just going to give up in this spot and feel completely fine about it, but when we do continue, we're going to continue in aggressive fashion, and we'll get to exactly how to do that. In fact, we've got a whole module on it, on how to 4-bet, but you do have options. So let's get into this a little bit more then. What process should you go through when you get 3-bet? Well, the first question you want to ask is, what do they have? And we know by now we're not just asking what hand, we're going to ask what range of hands do they have. So like any poker problem when you're trying to figure out an opponent and what their actions mean, you're going to think, what hands would he do this with? So how many hands would he do this for value, for example? And by that I mean, what are the strong hands he's doing with? And how often would he do it as a bluff or a semi-bluff? I'm sure you know that there are some players who would never re-raise as a bluff, ever. And if you play live at a sort of low to medium tournament level, you'll see quite a lot of players that will never re-raise as a bluff. So you need to know that. So that's the first question, what's their range? And you're basing that on your player read. And then you're going to ask, can I proceed with the best hand for value? So once you've got a rough idea of their range in your head, the type of hands they have, you're asking, is my hand better than them? So let's put it very simply. Let's say you have 2 queens and somebody re-raises you. Well, except for really bizarre extreme circumstances, your hand of 2 queens is better than their average hand, so you're going to proceed for value, and that means putting more money in the pot most of the time. So that's going to mean 4-betting. And as I said, the last module this month is on 4-betting specifically. Occasionally you can trap, so say you have aces and someone re-raises you to mix it up, you can trap, but really a lot of the time you're going to proceed by increasing the stakes. But either way you're proceeding for value. The second way that you could proceed is as a bluff. So we've raised, somebody has 3-bet us, and we're going to raise again 4-betting as a bluff. Again, we'll cover this in depth in the next module, but that's the other way that you can proceed. The final action you can take is not to 3-bet for value or 3-bet as a bluff, or even to fold, but to defend against the 3-bet or call the 3-bet. So the last question you can ask yourself before throwing your cards in the muck is, can you defend or call the 3-bet? Now this is the most dangerous of the three, and how you can get yourself into the most trouble, in my opinion. It's a massive, massive area of weakness for a lot of players, even up to the middle limits, which is just calling far too many 3-bets. And if I accomplish one thing this month, it's going to be to try and get you out of that habit. It's a passive, often unprofitable thing to do unless certain conditions are met. So imagine that big red flashing warning siren again. Defending 3-bets is something that you want to try and only be doing in certain conditions are met. So I'm going to talk more about it. In a bit, Kevin is going to talk about how unprofitable it is to call 3-bets out of position. And the exceptions to where you can do that, but basically he's going to tell you not to do it. So first of all, calling 3-bets in position. I want to cover this off just so we've got all your bases covered. So this is going to be when you've raised and one of the blinds has re-raised you, 3-bet you, and so you've got position on them and you've decided not to 4-bet, either as a bluff or for value, and you're thinking about 3-betting. So the first thing is your mindset in this situation, and here's what I see players do over and over and over again, which is they call and their plan is to hit something. So they think, I'll call the 3-bet with a hand, I don't know, let's say Jack-9 suited or 6-5 offsuit or something. They call to see a flop, in quotes, and hit something, in quotes. Please never do that. An aggressive player will destroy you when you do that. Everything is in his favour. He's got the best hand most of the time. He's the 3-better. He's the aggressor. He's got the lead. And the maths simply aren't there for you to hit a good enough hand often enough to see a flop. And on top of that, that's not including the money that you'll lose when you hit part of the flop and kind of call a couple of streets before you realise he really does have a hand. So please don't call 3-bets to see a flop and hit something. It's just not good poker. Have a post-flop plan, okay? Base your play around a plan which should either be trapping somebody, like occasionally you might call a 3-bet with aces or kings to trap them. For example, if you think they're over aggressive and you're confident you can play them well after the flop. You might call them because you've seen them 3-bet a lot but not follow through, so you can float them on the flop and take it away from them on the turn. Or you know that if they check the flop after 3-betting, they've always got big cards and they've given up, so you can bet the turn. Or you think they're 3-bet bluffing a lot and you want to call with a hand that's ahead of their range, which we'll look at in a second. But have a post-flop plan. Don't just call the 3-bet idly, because it leads to bleeding off huge amounts of chips. And here's the mindset I want you to have, at least at first. If you only ever fold or 4-bet when you get 3-bet, that is fine. You're leaving very little money on the table until you play good players. When you play good players, they will exploit you if you're doing something as kind of straightforward as that. But you don't need to worry about that until you get to the kind of intermediate limits, really. So I'm not saying you can never ever defend a 3-bet, but what I am saying is exercise a lot of caution when you do. And if you decide not to, at least temporarily, while you get more aggressive pre-flop game, that's completely fine. You're really leaving very little on the table, as I said. If you do decide you want to defend in position via a blind versus a blind player's 3-bet, a player in the blinds is what I mean. I'm not suggesting visual impairment. That is just a grammatical quirk and probably one of many errors on these slides. I make them myself. I don't want to tell you. It's a disaster. It's all about quality of information, not spelling. So if you can defend a 3-bet, do it with a strong range. Okay, so if anything, be overly cautious with the range of hands you defend with. So with our value range for 4-betting, it's going to be a pretty standard aces, kings, queens, ace, king most of the time. I thought quite hard about whether to actually specify what you should defend with, because it is situational, and this training is going to be training that gives you kind of tools that you can adapt to any situation. But also I want to give you, practical things that you can use. So I am going to give you a defending range, but it comes with a cautionary note that this is just by way of a track for you to run on, a start point, if you like, and you should adjust it based on how often your opponent is 3-betting, what history you have between you, how often you've defended 3-bets in the past, your stack size, lots of different things, which again is not the scope of this month. This month is about getting you more aggressive and getting you to deal with aggression the right way pre-flop. But here is a defending range. So let's say you've opened from the cutoff and a blind, a small blind or a big blind has made the 3-bet. You're going to 4-bet hands bigger than in this range, and then you're going to defend 9s through jacks, ace queen, king queen suited, jack queen suited, and jack 10 suited. Those are all hands that play pretty well, pretty easily after the flop, because you'll know whether you've hit or not. And they're strong hands that are, likely ahead of most aggressive 3-betters range. So there's a track for you to run on. So that's the mentality we want. We want to ask, can we proceed for value? Can we proceed as a bluff? Or can we call a 3-bet? And that's in a rare exceptions. Okay, now Kevin McPhee is going to come back in now, and he's got some very strong thoughts on this, which are basically going to echo what we've just been through, and explain to you exactly why calling 3-bets can be so dangerous and how the better way to proceed is. So let's bring in Kevin, and this will be a little bit of McPhee on being 3-bet. So let's talk about getting 3-bet. So we're the opener and we get 3-bet, because this is another area where I see people really struggle, especially when they're out of position and they have, again, we're in that kind of medium strength hand territory is where people seem to have a huge problem with it. What's your thinking? How would you advise people to play when they're getting 3-bet a lot?
Well, it depends obviously a lot on the opponent. When you're talking about calling a 3-bet out of position, you got to understand that calling 3-bets out of position is one of the more unprofitable things that you can do in poker.
And yet you see it happen so much.
And it happens all the time, and it's a stubbornness, and it's just one of those things that it's really opponent dependent too, because there's certain opponents that it's just, they're literally only 3-betting value cards, and if you're peeling a flop out of position with something that's being dominated by their value range, not only are you losing money just from that, you're also losing money by the fact that you're check folding all the flops you miss, and they're winning all those. It's just pretty bad.
It's a disaster.
It's pretty disastrous to be calling 3-bets out of position. Now, there are some hands that are really, really good to do it with. Ace Queen, and I'm actually a huge proponent of flat calling with Ace King as well.
Okay, that's interesting.
Because if I'm at the right stack size now,
which is kind of roughly where.
Well, when you're talking about a 4-betting stack size, you're usually talking like if you're gonna open a pot, somebody's gonna 3-bet you, and you're gonna have a stack size where you want to 4-bet jam something like Ace King. You're talking usually between like 30 to 50 big blinds, basically at the maximum.
Yeah.
Once you get above 50 big blinds, I get a little bit hesitant to 4-bet Ace King, because I don't want them to play their 5-bet value range perfectly against me. So if their 5-bet value range is only aces and kings, and those are the only hands I'm getting in against,
right,
then what's the point of 4-betting Ace King? Whereas an amateur player might be making the same mistake like I was talking about earlier, where they're 3-betting hand like Ace Jack, but they're folding it to a 4-bet. So what's the point of 4-betting Ace King? You want to keep the 3-bet range wide. You want to dominate the 3-bet range. You don't want to limit down their range to only aces and kings and hands that beat you. So there's kind of this concept of keeping somebody's range, that is the amount of hands that they're playing in that position, as wide as possible, and not limiting it down to hands that you're losing to. So if I am sitting there with like Ace King or Ace Queen and a really tight player, and we're saying maybe 60, 80 big blinds deep, 3-bets me, I'm going to call with Ace King or Ace Queen.
Right.
The same thing is true for a loose player too. Even though, if I really think the guy's going to 5-bet jam Ace Jack and Ace Queen, then I'll do it. But if I don't think he is, then you're losing money by 4-betting Ace King. And it just comes down to the concept of just keeping the range as wide as possible, so that when you see a flop, I like to see flops with Ace King personally.
Right.
When you flop an Ace or a King, you're going to win on a lot of chips.
That's when poker's easy.
Yeah, right? That's when poker's really easy. And your hand is deceptive, because they're not ever going to think that you have Ace King in that spot. They're like, well, why wouldn't he just shove pre-flop? And then when they're 3-betting with Ace Jack and the board comes Ace High, you're going to get all their chips, and when you're like at really, really high equity, and it's a really sort of like low risk, high reward sort of situation with ace king. So, yeah, I think a lot of the four betting, the first thing that four bet pots comes down to is stack size management.
Okay, well, let me pause you there because we'll just talk about four bet pots in a second. But I just wanted to clear up one thing, which is when we get three bet and we hold hands. This is the thing that I see people do constantly. They hold a hand like eights, nines, ace jack, but especially the kind of medium pocket pair type hands.
Yeah.
People hate to fold those.
Yeah.
And then if they have like a 50, 60 big blind stack, they kind of hate to stack off as well. And you see people end up calling with them so often. So just talk about what the right thing to do is there. I think we kind of touched on it. I just want you to explicitly kind of...
Well, I mean, like, you're walking a thin line, like, especially, let's just talk specifically about pocket pairs, because that's a very common mistake.
Yeah.
You need to be getting implied odds. So they say that, like, generally speaking, you flop a set 1 in 8.5 times that you see a flop. And so you need 15 to 1 implied odds. So that whatever his raise size is, whatever you're calling, whatever that one unit is, you have to be 15 units behind to win.
Okay.
And
so your call needs to be 15. That needs to go into his stack 15.
Yeah, like
your effective
if
stack.
you have 150k and you're calling 10k, then and he's got you covered. Then it's generally speaking okay to see flops with medium pairs.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't like seeing flops with really small pairs, deuces, threes, fours, fives. When I'm even getting 15 to 1 implied, I will try to fold those out because they just play so terrible.
Yeah.
But like at least when you have like sixes or nines, you have a hand that like even if you don't hit a set, can still win a certain amount of the time. Whereas deuces, threes, and fours and fives
I think
play
people
terribly.
underestimate how much implied odds they actually need with flopping sets, just because they know the kind of 8 to 1 number, and they sometimes, I know that better players know this, but perhaps recreational players don't realise that it's not as simple as that, because sometimes you won't get paid a penny after you flop your set.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll actually lose the hand after you flop your set. And when you factor everything in, you need a much bigger price in factor if you're going set mining, which recreational players kind of do too much, I think.
Well, I mean, also you got to think if you're dealing with a really, really aggressive opponent, that you're not really just set mining.
Right.
Like, the idea of the 15 to 1 implied odds is knowing that they have a big hand. That's part of the equation.
Yes.
So if you think they're up to no good, then you're not really getting paid off when you hit a set. You're going to flop a set 1 in 8.5 times.
They're not going to have anything.
And then they're not going to have anything. You're going to check raise the flop, and they're going to snap fold for one continuation bet. So it is definitely one of the trickiest things in poker is to play sort of middle-ish and small pairs out of position to 3 bets. You have to be relatively deep stacked to do it. You got to realize that like most of the time you're just check folding the flop, and when somebody has a really loose 3-betting range, they're gonna own you a lot in those situations.
And so it's kind of pocket pairs we need to fold out a lot of the time, and then stuff like sort of king queen ace 10, your kind of Broadway stuff when you get 3-bet out of position. How do you think about that situation?
Well, I mean, it's so much of it comes down to just knowing the player that's 3-betting you.
Right.
I mean, you can against certain players, you can just snap fold ace queen without even think about it, and just move on to the next hand. The important thing is to and one thing I've personally still been struggling with is just try to play tighter in these spots. Yeah. Because you want to be the person who's 3-betting somebody in position with the dominating hand.
This is a great point.
And you don't want to be the person who's out of position playing the stubborn old man who doesn't want to fold ever. You know?
Post-flop guesswork.
And you're just allowing any sort of good player to dance circles around you. And basically, I'm willing and would be a proponent of folding more hands in the spot just so I can be on the flip side in later hands.
Yeah, and I think that's Kevin. I think that's just a brilliant point. I think it's so fundamental, and I think that almost nobody plays like that. Funnily enough, I mean, obviously the professional players play like that, but in most of poker, people get that equation the wrong way around. I think.
Yeah, and I think that if you really think that people are up to it with 3 bets, it's really cheap to 4-bet fold, and not have to worry about it.
Right. Well, let's come on to talk about that, because I think you've covered what to do when we get 3-bet really well.
Okay, I think that gets the message over really well, and I just draw your attention back to the thing at the first point on screen, which is
calling 3-bets out of position is one of the most unprofitable things you can do in poker. I know how tempting it is. You've raised with 2 sevens or something. Some aggressive guy 3-bets you, and the last thing you want to do is just throw your 2 sevens away because you've been waiting for a long time to get any kind of hand. But this is Kevin McPhee, a man who's won too many poker tournaments to count and a 7-figure sum of money online and live. And trust me, you just do not want to be calling 3-bets out of position with half a hand and stuff like that. And the key point, the really key point that this whole month is about being the aggressor pre-flop. You want to be the person doing the 3-betting, not the person who's being punished by the 3-better. That's what we're trying to transform in your poker this month. So a couple of really important steps to dealing with 3-betting like a pro. Know your enemy's range. Now you can spend as much or as little time on this as you like. I would recommend that you try and spend a lot of time on it. It is a bit of study, and I try and minimize how much theory you have to do on this course because I know that's not what any of us want to do. However, at the very minimum, after each game, pick 3 times you were 3-bet, or even that you saw a 3-bet, like with another 2 players. And then write down what you think the player's range is. Okay, so just write down the hands you think he would 3-bet with in that spot. I know you know the result after the session, but imagine you can't see the cards, okay? And write down the hands that you think that he could have had. And then if you're playing online and you've got a kind of percentage for him as a player, then you can compare it against that. Or even if you don't have that, check it out on pokerstove.com. Put the hands in that you think he would 3-bet with and just see how much of a percentage that is of the hands he would be dealt. Because that'll just get you familiar with what kind of range of hands people are 3-betting for value in different spots. I just want you to do exercises that get you familiar with that kind of thing without doing a lot of study on it. And then you can assess the correct action for different hands against him. So this is taking it to the next level. And it depends how hard you want to work. It depends what results you want. But let's say you're looking at a hand where you had 2 kings and you got 3-bet, happy days, you got the money in, whatever. That's the easy part of poker. Let's say you're looking at that spot and you give that opponent, let's say he 3-bet 6% of the time and he never bluffs. Well, now you can say, okay, with 2 kings it was easy. What should I have done with 2 jacks in that situation? Well, probably you should have still got the money in against that sort of range. Well, what about 2 nines? So you can go through and just question what you would have done in different situations, and that'll just get your brain used to what to think about when you get re-raised. You won't always have the answer, but the more times you ask the question, the better. Now the second one, this is going to be fun for you. This is a fun step, and it's also going to be really important. You're going to play the never call a 3-bet game. So for the next 10 sessions of poker, doesn't matter what they are, tournaments, cash games, whatever, you're banned from calling a 3-bet. So no calling of re-raises. You are only allowed to 4-bet or fold. Now we're going to talk about 4-betting in the next module, and we're going to talk about bet sizing and why you should bet small. But just for now, when you 4-bet, unless you can go all in, so if you can go all in, fine. But if you're deep stacked, just make it slightly more than the minimum raise to 4-bet. Okay, so that's probably going to be 11, 12 bets or something. But the game is you're only allowed to 4-bet or fold. And then after each session, go over the hands you played differently and notice how it's changed your game, and particularly look at any hands where you've kind of really done something different. So notice that instinct to call 3-bets and then how your game transforms and how players react to you differently. So you're only 4-betting or folding for 10 sessions. It's going to be fun. You're going to enjoy it. You're going to be feeling much more aggressive at the end of doing that, and you'll be getting some really big pre-flop pots. So it's going to challenge you. Okay, if again, as with all of the playing exercises, if you want to drop down in limit for comfort, and so you're not risking as much, that's fine. Even better though, as soon as you can, do it in your normal game, because that's when you're going to be doing this stuff for realsies. Okay? I hope that's really helped. The next one's going to round off the month brilliantly. We're going to look at 4-betting, something that most of us don't do enough of, and something that probably you've never been taught how to do. So it's going to be really, really useful, I think. Have fun with these 2 steps and changing the way you deal with 3-bets. I'll see you in the last module.